Hey there, welcome back to the new show. My name's Rob. It's a chilly-ass morning here in Virginia. It got down to 16 degrees last night. Luckily, I am safe and warm here in my fur-lined fallout shelter. Today I wanted to talk about the X-Files. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Now you might ask, how am I going to do one episode and talk about everything that's important about the X-Files without doing a multi-part video series taking weeks of my life? Well, the answer is I don't know exactly, but we're going to find out together. So let's talk about the good. The X-Files, in its inception, shares a lot of similarities to the 1963 Outer Limits, specifically the first season, in that both shows were doing science fiction plots with monsters and experimental effects. And this is one area where both shows really shine, is in coming up with really innovative and eye-catching effects on a small budget. In addition, both shows had a very distinctive dark mood. Part of this had to do with the fact that in the early seasons of The X-Files, the show was shot, primarily in Canada, and there wasn't a lot of available sunlight when they were shooting. It was often overcast and cloudy. You can't beat clouds and fog for doing horror material. This is not a specific top 5, but more examples of what the show was best at. The episode that always comes to mind for me when I think of, what's one of the best examples of the X-Files creating tension and terror on a tiny budget with limited effects, would be the show Darkness Falls from Season 1. This episode manages to make fireflies scary. That in itself is kind of an achievement. But beyond that, it's a great mood piece that has this built-in sense of countdown because the fireflies come out in the darkness. You have this great day-long build-up of events leading them to the conclusion that they're going to be doomed if they don't get out of these woods before the sun goes down. It's well written, it's scary, it's season 1, so the show wasn't bogged down in the backstories of the characters as it became later. It's just a really clean piece of writing. Another thing that the X-Files was good at doing was bringing out a great performance from a character actor. In the case of the episode The Field Where I Died, the performance by actress Kristen Cloak as the cult member, probably the best single performance in the run of the series. And if you've never seen the episode, go and watch it for her. The only downside of it is when David Duchovny has to do his hypnotic regression scene, and he doesn't really, he tries, but Cloak's performance so blows him out of the water. Maybe he felt intimidated, I don't know. Another shattering character performance would be from Jeffrey Lewis in Tithonus, where he plays a death photographer who is actually immortal and is looking for death so that he can finally die because he's sick of being alive. It is such a deep, sad performance, and he is so good in this one part. It's kind of heartbreaking. He was a great talent. The X-Files also in Season 5 had the excellent Kill Switch that was partly written by cyberpunk author William Gibson. Talk about a unique villain character for an episode. The rogue AI in Kill Switch has wonderful qualities. Not necessarily something the X-Files would have covered in the way they did, but Gibson gives the whole thing that jolt of adrenaline that his writing has. Another thing that really contributed to the effectiveness of the early X-Files was Mark Snow's electronic soundtrack. While much of Snow's material was sort of rhythmic or ambient, he still would manage to come up with certain evocative sets of sounds that are memorable, even years later, like in the two-parter Colony Endgame. There's this atonal drone that runs through that whole episode, and it just always makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up whenever I hear it. When the X-Files was good, it was great. But when it was bad, it really stank. Take a look at Fearful Symmetry, about circus animals being abducted. No, it's... And this is an episode that's a prime example of where the X-Files got into trouble with its overly serious tone. And no matter how you write it, Mulder crying over an elephant losing her baby to aliens is just... It's just a really good example of when the X-Files could feel exploitive, a little sickening, emotionally overwrought. And the tendency of the show to occasionally poke some really uncomfortable areas clearly went too far in the notorious episode Home about the incestuous cannibal family, and worse perhaps in the two-parter Sinun Zeit and Closure, where a tip that leads to a serial killer of children leads to Mulder discovering that his sister actually is dead, and he comes to accept it. I mean, it's nice to have Mulder get closure over the loss of his sister, but the episode actually goes out of its way to relate itself to the Jean-Benet Ramsey killings. And it feels... The X-Files is a kind of TV show that really can't speak to real tragedy. It's a science fiction horror show. Getting into the area of child murder was just about to where I was up to my neck in the X-Files. Where the series ends for me is when Mulder gets abducted. Reunion, where they go back to the town they visit in the very first episode. That just made sense to me as an ending for the show, just perfect place to stop. It was like Fox Mulder had completed his arc. He was looking for his sister, he found his sister, he gets abducted by aliens, he goes off with the alien bounty hunter at the end. I thought that was a fine farewell for everything they had covered. The show felt a little rudderless after Season 5, although I thought Season 5 had its share of really good episodes and two-parters and whatnot. I mean, starting Season 5 with Fox Mulder no longer believing in the alien conspiracy just seemed to me a very strange place to go with the show. I could see going there for a couple of episodes, but not a whole season. I thought that was odd. I thought the addition of the renegade aliens showing up to screw up the plans of the conspiracy of old men. I thought that was interesting, but not necessarily good. And then when they finally ended up killing off all the members of the conspiracy, I couldn't even understand what the show was going to be about then. The whole alien colonization narrative, I mean, to me, was woven into the DNA of the show. You can just pull it out, but they did. Beyond Mulder's abduction, I just thought it was pretty meh television. The super soldiers and Scully's baby being psychic. It felt like a bunch of janky plot threads. And nothing in it, to me, felt coherent. And the incoherence continued after the show officially ended. I mean, now it's started up again, and to me the new stuff is a reboot of The X-Files. It's not The X-Files. The X-Files, to me, is a program of the 90s. What value a modern version of The X-Files has, I don't really know. I don't think there's anything left to explore with those characters. And I felt that way when I saw the movie I Want to Believe. And this is where we get into the ugly. I can't imagine a TV series creator wanting to do a sequel, ostensibly for the fans, making a movie that was as shockingly ugly as I Want to Believe was. It's basically a transgender Frankenstein story. Let's make this the most horrid depiction of a transgender person as we could possibly think of. I mean, that kind of representation you would barely get away with in the 1970s, much less today. And so that's where I stopped caring and stopped watching. It was just such a shitty movie. And it was written by Chris Carter, it was made by Chris Carter, and I really began to wonder, what the fuck is wrong with Chris Carter? The fact is, though, stereotyping was not uncommon to the X-Files. Really not a good show for mental illness stereotyping. And beyond those kind of things, I can't tell if it's because the X-Files was released on Fox, or because it was made in Canada, or both. But the series has a very sort of specific idea of America in it. And it's not pretty. And at times feels more than a little right-wing. Even fringe right-wing. There are several episodes of the show that deal with fertility clinics and abortion clinics. and they are always shown to be places of horror and of bad things happening. And it feeds into the underpinnings of the show that there is something criminally corrupt in the federal government. The X-Files always painted the federal government not in a good light. One of the more obvious ways to unpack that is to consider that the show takes place mostly during the presidency of Clinton. And I always had the feeling that the show was kind of a snipe against his presidency. In that, under President Clinton in the show, you have the FBI using taxpayer money to chase down aliens and talk to spirits and whatnot, and constantly referencing and promoting conspiracy theories. We actually live in an age now where conspiracies that, like were mentioned on the X-Files, are now being taken completely seriously by at least a third of the country. And I do wonder sometimes, how much did the X-Files help that along? It would be nice if Fox Mulder had been the kind of character who would discount conspiracy theories, but he never does on the show. He seems to want to believe in all of them. But putting aside my political guesses, at its best, innovative and extremely effective at creating scares, and at its worst, extremely effective at creating moral and emotional discomfort in the viewer. Well, thanks for letting me alternately praise and bitch about the X-Files. To whoever contributed $1 to my Patreon already, I wanted to say thank you so much. That first contribution is so important, and I really appreciate you going out of your way to help me out. And as for everyone else, I'll see you next time.